Hi, folks. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're joining us from for this new episode of The Rise Up Radio. And today I have a very special guest with me. His name is Serkan Deveci. Serkan, welcome to The Rise Up Radio.
Thanks so much for having me, Ashish. It's a pleasure to be with you.
So, folks, a quick introduction about Serkan. He has over 15 years of experience at Google, focusing on workforce development, planning, and management. His earlier stints were not only limited to prominent HR positions, but he started his career as a salesperson and then he transitioned to HR, and that's going to be a very specific transition that we're going to focus on today. But more about him, he brings a very unique perspective, which is at the intersection of sales and HR, like I said. And he's also a globally recognized keynote speaker on leadership effectiveness, AI, and the future of work. And second, we are excited to hear your thoughts, hearing your thoughts on all these topics. So, if you'd like to share a little bit more in detail about your journey with our audience today.
Sure. I'm also looking forward to our conversation. So again, thank you so much. My career journey. Well, as you've also described, it has been quite dynamic, which I believe gives me a unique perspective. I started out in sales and marketing, first with Danone, and then with a global bank based in Turkey. And after that, I joined Google. For a significant part of my time here, I was deeply immersed in sales and business strategy. I managed regional sales teams and I led strategy and operations for growing markets across Europe, Asia Pacific, and South America. And following that, I worked in people operations and HR for many years, where I had the opportunity to lead global and also regional HR and people strategy. I focused on areas like talent development, workforce planning, crafting engaging employee experiences. And then very recently, just about a month ago, I have transitioned back into a sales leadership role now. And if you think about it, this new position allows me to tap into my deep understanding of people dynamics from HR. And that's combined with my previous sales background. So it's been a fantastic journey, both in sales, strategy, and HR, which gives me a, I suppose, unique lens into business. And in addition to that, after having my master's degree in neuroscience, now I'm pursuing my PhD degree in psychology. And what I'm doing there is I am researching the impact of leadership behaviors on employee well-being and engagement. And these days, I focus on the intersection of leadership, employee experience, and the future of work, especially where AI is beginning to shift how we think, how we decide, how we lead. I also speak around the world, as you also mentioned, about these topics, because I believe we're only just beginning to unlock the leadership potential that exists in organizations.
Yeah, and more so as the future of work comes, the workplace is going to change, and we might need totally new behaviors. I think your research is coming at the right time, Second.
Absolutely.
Awesome. So, folks, leadership is a constantly evolving, paradigm, right? And especially with the workplace changing, it's going to evolve even further. And in what shape and form, I think it remains to be seen. But primarily, we have also seen in the past that there's no set playbook, and that is why we keep going back to people like Second and understand their journeys and their experiences around building teams. Helping other leaders build their teams and build their leadership journeys as well. So, second, my first question to you is more around, the common experiences and patterns that typically managers experience when they become managers for the first time. And how was it for you when you became a manager for the first time?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's a journey I remember well. And a very common pattern I see as the star player to coach transition, and it's a
Yeah.
bumpy one. It can be a bumpy
Mm,
one.
mm,
New managers are typically promoted because they were exceptional individual contributors and
right.
they were the best salesperson, I don't know, the sharpest analyst, the most creative designer, the best engineer.
Right.
So when they become a manager, their first instinct is to do one of the two things. Either they try to be the super solver for their
Mm-hmm.
team,
Mm-hmm.
so they jump in to fix every problem themselves, or they try to micromanage because they want to ensure their team members do the task exactly as they would have done it.
Correct.
So there is this identity shock, if you
Yeah.
want, right? You're no longer measured by your own performance, but you're measured by your teams. So
Correct.
as an individual contributor, your value is your output.
That's
But as
true.
a manager, your value becomes invisible. It's
That's true.
in how others perform, grow, and feel. And that's
Mm,
a hard shift. That
mm,
transition for me requires emotional control, self awareness, and sometimes letting go of the need to be right all the time. And it's
yeah.
uncomfortable, especially for people who have been rewarded for their executional ability up until
Correct.
that point. So,
Mm,
what happens then is new managers feel the urge to prove themselves at all times. So, they overcompensate by doing, fixing, rescuing, but what their teams actually need is clarity,
mm,
space, and
mm,
someone who listens
mm,
more than speaks.
mm.
When new managers get that, I always think the job becomes a lot less about control and a
Correct.
lot more about, connection.
Correct.
So, Ashish, I don't know, that's the first one, the identity shock.
I think
And
that's a big
yeah,
one, Serkan, because what you explained is typically what we also see, right?
yeah,
So managers either become too controlling or too liberating, right? Okay, I need to be people pleasing or I need to be controlling, and a lot of times, they set those
totally.
high standards that they have set themselves for, and they want their team to follow. Either that leads to their own burnout or the team's burnout, or maybe a burnout of all of them together.
Yeah. Yeah, look, you put it very nicely because I very often see first-time managers confuse being a leader with being an upgraded version of a
Correct.
high-performing individual
Correct.
contributor. They are totally different. They step
Yeah.
in thinking the job is still about doing things better or faster, when actually their value shifts to how they create clarity, energy, and
Mm,
direction for
mm,
others. Um, so that's probably the first one, but if you let me add another one as
yeah.
well, because I think that's really very important because people tend to forget about it.
Mm,
The other common experience that managers observe or experience is the feeling of that loneliness,
right.
because you're no longer just one of them. There's a new
Yep.
dynamic, and
Yep.
conversations are different. The nature of your relationships changes. You might have previously been peers with the
Yep.
people you now manage,
Mm,
and that shift can create a distance. You can feel, caught between your team and the expectations of senior leadership. And that in between space can be quite isolating.
mm,
So I think it's really an important reminder. Nearly everyone new into the managerial role feels the
yeah.
same way. So, people have to understand that the problem is not me, the problem is not you.
Right. So a lot of times, these new managers need support systems second, right? And I think this is the duration, this is the time when they need the most handholding, either from their supervisors or the support system around them. Typically, a mentor or a coach would really help them a lot during this transition, isn't it?
It is a huge transition. It is
Yeah.
a huge transition. Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, go on, please.
No, no, please, please, complete your thoughts.
It is a huge one because like you see a lot of mistakes that
Yeah.
managers tend to make, and that's why to your point, the mentorship becomes extremely important. And I'm thinking about kind of the mistakes that
Hmm.
tend to leave like the deepest impression on new
Correct. Correct.
managers. One of the biggest ones is delaying a difficult conversation, whether it's about underperforming or a behavioral issue.
Right.
New managers tend to postpone these talks, so
Yeah.
they hope to they hope the problem will
It will
resolve
resolve
itself.
itself. Correct.
Exactly, and it never does. It
It
only
never
gets
does.
worse,
Correct.
right? The eventual conversation is then much harder. And interestingly, what I observed both as a sales leader but also in HR,
Hmm.
new managers hope the cavalry will come
Hmm.
to save them, so they
Yeah.
try to outsource the hard conversation to
Right.
HR rather than owning it themselves. And then
Correct.
eventually, the manager learns a tough lesson about the importance of courage and candor. It's a critical part of their role in the end,
Mm,
developing their team, maintaining standards. So, taking that responsibility and ownership on their own shoulder
mm.
is the most important thing.
Absolutely. And, this is really funny because I've been in that position where I've delayed, having those difficult conversations. And that's why I was laughing. And I think most of the managers typically go through this thought process that, hey, you know what? I don't want to have this conversation because it might make things unpleasant, right? Because I want to have a cordial relationship with my team. I don't want to, want them to think that, I'm being bossy by
Yeah.
doing that. But at the end of the day, I think the core is because they don't know how to get constructive feedback or how to be assertive in certain situations, right? And balance that thought process of being strict as well as being, pally and being loving. And I use this term very frequently, which is tough love, which is, the way you treat your children, the way you basically love them, but also kind of discipline them. I think a very similar approach is required for treating your team members as well, a lot of times.
Yeah, no, totally. And maybe taking it from there with the love. I think another one is uh, trying to be liked by everyone.
Mhm.
Is, a new manager wants to be liked, which
Correct.
is, to be fair, a very natural feeling. They might
Correct.
have been peers with their team members just a short
Correct.
while ago, but the role of a leader is different from the role of a friend. Sometimes leadership means making unpopular decisions for the good
Yeah.
of the team and the business. So
Correct.
decisions about, resource allocation, project assignments,
Yeah.
performance expectations. And the first time a manager has to make a call that disappoints someone on their team or hold someone accountable in a way that feels
Correct.
uncomfortable, that's a lesson
That's
that
hard as well.
sticks with
Yeah.
the new manager. Yeah, like it. They learn that effective leadership isn't
Correct.
a what's the word?
Correct.
It's not a popularity contest, but it's responsibility for fairness. I always come back to clarity and
Yeah.
making the tough calls when necessary.
Awesome. So let's shift gears more towards the sales side. Second, I'm really excited to hearing your thoughts about that. So, in your view, what are some of the non-negotiable capabilities that a successful sales leader consistently demonstrates on the ground?
Yeah, very clearly for me, three things. First is clarity,
Hmm.
because a great sales leader doesn't just know how to sell. Yes, it is
Yeah.
very important, but also
Hmm.
they understand the market, competition,
Correct.
financials,
Yeah.
how their teams work connects to company's overall strategy. But
Hmm.
the commercial aspect on its own is
Hmm.
not enough alone. Sales
Correct.
leaders who are successful don't just push for numbers. They set
Hmm.
direction. They
Hmm.
stay calm when the forecast dips, and
Yeah.
they obsess over what's changing in the market, the
Yeah.
customer, the team. They also know that winning doesn't mean doing more and more. It
Hmm.
means focusing on what actually moves the needle.
Yeah.
Um, so that's first one. The second one is, and I think that's really very important, is the ability to be a talent magnet.
Hmm.
The best leaders are constantly attracting,
Hmm.
developing, and retaining top talent. They're those, who can easily see potential in people, and they
Yeah.
create an environment where high performance really want to be. They're not afraid of hiring people who might be better than them. And
Correct.
that's easier said than done. Um, the third is, I suppose, the ability to build resilience into the team's DNA. Sales has natural highs and lows, and leaders who treat those cycles with emotional steadiness,
Hmm.
who don't overreact to the dip or get complacent with the spike, they build teams that know how to pace themselves. And
Yeah.
good sales leaders help teams spend their time on things that create that momentum or movement that takes confidence to say no. And,
Correct.
you know, emotional range is underrated because when deals fall through or when quarters don't land or markets shift, great leaders don't just push. They
Hmm.
absorb, they reframe, and they reset. They know how to read the room, they recalibrate momentum.
Hmm.
These are not soft skills we tend to always label them as soft skills, but they are critical commercial levers. And if you lack them as a sales leader, your results will always be volatile, no matter how well your product is. And
Right.
while going through those three, let me break my own flow and go with
Okay.
a fourth one here.
Okay.
Perhaps let me position it as the all-encompassing leadership capability, not the fourth one. But they know their business inside out, the good
Hmm.
sales leaders. I
Hmm.
don't just mean pipeline numbers, but I mean consumer behavior, market trends, competitor
Okay.
moves, internal levers. So commercial intelligence do matter. Um, they also balance that with human intelligence, though.
Hmm.
So they know how to coach. They know how to call out
Hmm.
underperformance without destroying morale. And they create space for people to grow, not just
Yeah.
deliver.
Right. So I think there's always that fine balance between creating a culture which is performance driven, but also prevents burnout, right? And I think in sales, it's even more important. So what is your take on that?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I have to say this. We tend to confuse prevention with intervention far
Hmm.
too often.
Hmm.
Prevention is about designing the environment in a way that reduces the likelihood of burnout in the
Hmm.
first place.
Hmm.
And then you have intervention, which
Yep.
is what you do after people are already struggling.
Correct.
So the analogy that I always use is prevention is about building and designing the highway so people
Hmm.
don't crash,
Yep.
and an intervention is sending the ambulance after the
Yep.
crash. And these are not interchangeable words, but in practice, you see what business and HR leaders invest in is
Yep.
actually intervention, but not really prevention.
Hmm.
So when it comes to high performance and burnout, what works is building and recovery by design. So
Hmm.
we can't wait until people burn out and then ask how they're doing. You design the
True.
pace.
Correct.
And I don't know, this starts by acknowledging, by genuinely internalizing that the fact that performance and well being are not in conflict. You don't choose between them,
Correct.
you build both. So
Correct.
the mindset is, I suppose, what separates short bursts of success from
Hmm.
longer term or sustainable performance. So I think to your question, then we have to design recovery into the system. So how
Hmm.
does that look?
Hmm.
Thinking intentionally about
Hmm.
cadence,
Hmm.
how intensity builds
Yep.
and then
Yep.
releases, where reflection happens, how rituals support energy renewal. I think
Right.
those are really very
That's
important.
more on the prevention side, and then you have something on the intervention side as well, so that if and when situations come, you are ready for it.
Exactly, because it comes back to the leader again, because
Hmm.
leaders who role model boundaries, reflection, and
True.
learning,
True.
and not just output, they
Correct.
send strong signals. It's
Correct.
as simple as taking a pause to
Yep.
celebrate the wins, but also reflect together and ask at the end of a sales quarter
Hmm.
and before the next one begins, as simple as what did we learn? What do we want to carry forward? What do we want to leave
Change.
behind?
Yep. Correct.
Exactly. So, with that self reflection and team reflection, you also need visible leadership behaviors around rest, feedback, and psychological
Right. Right.
safety.
Right.
And these aren't just wellness initiatives. I see these as performance
Yeah.
infrastructures.
I think there's a lot of role model setting as well, right? As a leader, you need to lead by example, by taking rest yourself and taking breaks yourself, so that your team knows that it's not wrong to do these things at the end of the day, right? We are striving
Yeah,
for high performance, but we can only strive for high performance once we have the foundations done, which is well-being of ourselves and our team.
absolutely. And that comes down to, I don't know, a few leadership behaviors. So, first is, and I keep saying this since the beginning of our conversation, but clarity is
Yeah.
very important and purpose, because a team that understands why they are doing what they are doing and how it connects to the organization's
Yeah.
goal is far more resilient. So it's the leader's job to constantly reinforce this. But then with that also comes creating a culture of
Right.
psychological safety. Now, I know this term, the psychological safety, get thrown around a lot. And yes, some leaders roll their eyes because it's been reduced to a buzzword, but
True.
the reality is psychological safety is not a soft concept.
Mm.
It isn't about being nice or avoiding
It's
conflict.
it's not even measurable, right? You can't measure it. You can just experience it.
Absolutely, because it's about creating the conditions for
Correct.
productive friction and intellectual honesty. So it's
Correct.
the ability for the most junior person on your team to say, I disagree with that approach.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that they can say it without fear of humiliation or punishment. That's a big difference.
Absolutely. So let's talk about the unique perspectives that you're bringing, right? Second, so you have one-sided work with the HR teams and sales teams, right? Is it different being a leader of a sales team versus a leader of an HR team?
Yeah, yeah, especially for the last month, I've been asked this question so many times. Like it's a rightful question. It's an interesting one. I
Hmm.
suppose the core tenets of leadership don't change. Whether you're
Correct.
leading in
Yeah.
sales or in HR, you're responsible for driving outcomes through,
Yeah.
again, clarity, strategy, and people. So it always comes down to blending deep commercial intelligence with equally deep human intelligence. The balance is very important.
Hmm.
The context changes, but the core opportunity doesn't.
Hmm.
So, sales leadership operates in a um, more externally paced rhythm. So,
Hmm.
quarterly targets, direct customer feedback, competitive pressure. It's about commercial momentum and translating strategy into action
Hmm.
fast. And success is measurable. But just because many metrics are tangible or measurable, that doesn't mean it's simple. And that's where the great sales leadership comes into place because it requires system thinking,
Hmm.
resource allocation, forecasting, talent development. And then on the other hand, HR leadership works on a longer time horizon.
Hmm.
The wins in HR can be, I suppose, harder to measure and
Hmm.
it can take much longer to materialize. So you are
Yeah.
shaping systems that impact culture, capability, and long term resilience. The outcomes are just as commercial because you're
Yeah.
talking about retention, leadership bench, engagement, but they are measured over a much longer time and the impact is not immediately
Right.
visible.
Right. I love the way you put it, which is, immediate visible results versus long-term visible results, right? And we often tend to say that, since results are not being visible, they're not being created, but that's not true at the end, isn't it?
Absolutely, absolutely. And if you think about it, then in both roles, sales leadership or HR leadership, you're navigating invisible forces, right?
Right.
So trust, fairness, psychological safety, both roles demand the same leadership
True.
muscles, making decisions with
Mm.
incomplete data,
Yeah.
aligning diverse stakeholders, and
Yeah.
leading with both empathy and a commercial mindset.
Yeah. Yeah. So now, being a sales leader or an HR leader, or maybe a leader in any other function, right? You typically, as a leader, have to navigate tough situations always, right? So, what are some of the approaches or learning methods that you have seen leaders lean on to navigate these difficult situations?
Yeah, yeah. The most effective leaders I have seen are continuous learners, and
Hmm.
they do it in a few ways.
Hmm.
One, they build a personal board of directors, so they have a small, trusted group of mentors and peers,
Right.
both inside and outside their company,
Hmm.
that they can go to for advice and a different perspective.
Hmm.
So the importance here is they don't try to solve everything on their own.
Hmm.
Number two, they are amazing readers and listeners. They're
Hmm.
constantly consuming information. It can be business books, articles, podcasts, fiction stories, and
Hmm.
novels.
Hmm.
They broaden their thinking, creativity, and they are hungry for new perspectives.
Hmm.
Um, and then three, they engage in what I call structured reflection. They
Hmm.
build reflection into their operating rhythm,
Hmm.
especially in hard moments. They
Hmm.
don't react immediately, right? So they pause, assess, and then zoom out.
Yeah.
They ask themselves very simple questions like, what was the situation? What did I do? What was the result? And what would I do differently next time? It's a great practice of turning experience into insight. So
Learning. Hmm.
I also see a lot of value in structured peer learning.
Hmm.
I have run and joined circles where leaders unpack what's actually going on beneath the surface, not
Hmm.
just performance updates, but
Yeah.
real leadership dilemmas. And those are the moments of shared honesty.
Hmm. Awesome. Cool. So let's talk about some of the programs that you would have built, right? If you're building a program for sales leaders in the next generation, how do you shape it?
Um, I think organizations need to move beyond just teaching sales methodologies and
Yeah.
focus on developing leaders who operate on two parallel tracks:
Hmm.
commercial acumen and
Hmm.
human clarity.
Hmm.
What I mean by this is they need to know the market and
Hmm.
how value is created, but
Hmm.
they also need to master feedback, motivation, and
Hmm.
situational awareness. So, on the commercial track, not just how to sell, but how businesses work. They
Yeah.
should understand the likes of margin, market positioning, product strategy. Sales leaders aren't just revenue chasers, they are
Hmm.
strategic operators, and they need to know the market dynamics, the competitive landscape, how financial decisions impact strategy. They need to think like a general manager of their own business. They
Right.
need to know how to read a P&L, how to build a business case.
Hmm.
But that commercial engine is powered by people. So, and that brings me to the second track that I mentioned,
Hmm.
human clarity. So,
Hmm.
mastering the craft of leadership itself. Can the sales leader deliver feedback that motivates, not
Hmm.
judges?
Hmm.
Are they aware of both the intrinsic and the extrinsic drivers of their team members? Do they have the situational awareness to know when to push, when to support, when to get out of the way?
Yeah.
So, a program for the next generation of sales leaders must be built on this dual foundation: commerce and people. And one without the other creates an imbalance. You either get a great operator who burns out their team completely,
Yep. Yep.
well-like leader who can't navigate the business. So
Hmm.
integration of both is what matters.
That makes sense, second. Now, I can't stop myself but ask this, right? We are in the age of AI, right? So, have you seen any interesting experiments or use cases where, AI is integrating really well into leadership development practices?
Yeah, yeah. One area where um, AI is already having a solid impact is in how leaders make decisions. And
Hmm.
it's not about replacing judgment, but
Hmm.
expanding what we can see and consider. So the ability to process and analyze large volumes of data gives leaders sharper visibility into,
Right.
you name it, performance, risk, opportunity.
Right.
That said, the most effective leaders I see using AI well are the ones who approach it with a strong sense of perspective.
Hmm.
Um, there's this concept called sense making,
Hmm.
which basically means being able to interpret AI's outputs
Hmm.
in a way that fits the broader context of the business.
Hmm.
There's this research team in Leeds Beckett University, and they really emphasize that. So,
Hmm.
on one hand, there is what AI tells you now.
Yeah.
On the other hand, there is what AI helps you understand over time. And
Hmm.
what's critical here is the balance to strike.
Hmm.
Now, AI can easily push us towards over indexing on hard metrics, but
Yeah.
leadership also lives in the intangibles that we just talked about.
Right.
So, trust, instinct, values, those things don't show up in a dashboard.
Hmm.
Um, I really like how David Cathorp
Hmm.
summarizes it. He's a professor of neuroscience and psychiatry and also has some very interesting work on leadership. And he introduced the kinematic model of leadership. It's a
Okay.
dynamic view of leadership, as it sees us as something that constantly adapts to the environment,
Hmm.
including technological shifts like AI.
Hmm.
So when you study the model, you see that the model suggests that leaders need to balance AI capabilities with human insight, ethics, and
Hmm.
emotional intelligence.
Hmm.
So it encourages leaders to understand that AI enhances decision making and provides data insights,
Yeah.
but the human elements of vision setting, relationship building, emotional intelligence, empathy, they remain the absolute core of effective leadership. That's really very important.
Awesome. Cool. Well, second, we're coming towards the end of our discussion, and I have a few rapid fire questions for you. And
Okay.
just basically get to know you a little bit more deeper, but please answer whatever comes first to your mind, right? So
All
cool.
right.
So what is the one thing that you would always look for in someone when you're hiring them for your team?
Um, ownership and I suppose responsibility, because I look for people who run towards the problems, not away from them, and
Mhm.
those who see opportunities and issues. I also like to ask for a task done only once and not having to chase it until it's
Yeah.
completed. So yeah,
Uh,
ownership.
so how do you define ownership? Is this your definition of ownership, or is there
I think
some
the
more
last
detailed
part, yeah.
nuances?
Yeah, I think taking really the ownership and the accountability on itself, right? Because if you're asking a task to be done, and then you have to chase the person over and
Hmm.
over again, then the ownership or accountability isn't there.
Yeah, makes sense. And what is the one thing that would be a deal breaker for you to not hire somebody?
Oh, that's definitely blame. So if
Okay.
someone is more focused on defending themselves than learning from the situation, it blocks progress, because I value self-awareness over perfection at all times.
Makes sense. And which is the other side of the ownership as well, right? So if you're not taking ownership, you're definitely blaming other people for your missteps or whatever mistakes have been done.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
That makes sense. Cool. What do you do in your spare time, second?
Well, I love watching movies and TV shows that combine, witchcraft, a bit of horror, a good bit of
Okay.
suspense, something like The Fall of the House of Usher or The Magicians or Agatha All Along.
What are you watching right now?
I just finished Agatha All Along for the second time,
Okay.
but
Awesome.
I am now on to a bit of dark comedy. I'm watching Breeders, a
Oh,
UK TV show.
nice.
It's really cool. It's
Awesome. I'll check it
nothing
out.
to
I
do.
haven't heard about it, but I'll check it out for sure.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, if you were to recommend one book to budding managers and leaders, which one would that be?
Oh, that's a tough one. A book, because you can see that I have too many of them. Okay, ask me again in 2 weeks. I will
Okay.
probably have a different answer. But today, I would say Social by Matthew Lieberman. He's a professor of neuroscience, and more specifically, social cognitive neuroscience. And
Mhm.
his work focuses on how the brain processes social information and
Mhm.
why social connection is a fundamental human need. And I love that book because it's important for any leader to understand how our brains crave connection so
Correct.
that they can lead in a way that actually moves people and not just manages tasks or numbers.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it goes back to the first point that we were discussing, right? Understanding that also helps you understand how do you interact with people and what importance do you play, while interacting with people, and how you can balance, your social relationships at workplace, whereas performance on the other side, right? I think that would be a very good perspective to learn.
Totally.
Awesome. Well, Sagan, thank you so much for joining us for this episode of the Rise Up Radio. I love that chat, and I'm sure our audience is going to love it as well. So thank you again.
Ashish, thank you so much. That was wonderful.
All right, folks, there you go. So I think you definitely find this really valuable learning, what works in a sales leadership position and what works in a general leadership position, because the leadership behavior does not change from function to function. It largely remains the same, barring certain nuances. So thank you, Serkan, and I'm sure people are going to connect with you on LinkedIn as we're going to provide them with the link. All right,
Absolutely.
folks. Take care till I see you next time with a new episode of the Rise Up Radio. You folks take care till then and be safe. Bye bye.